coming together in groups and doing some type of, I don't know, it is a kind of group therapy, I guess, that we're all healing each other. And Ram Dass would say, and I use him, he's a great teacher of mine. I spent a week living with him in 2018, not long before he passed away. And he always said, we are walking each other home. And I love that quote. And I've just written a song, which I'm releasing in the next couple of weeks. I'll send it to you, and maybe you'd like to attach it to this podcast. It's a beautiful little video with it as well. We are walking each other home. And if we could just reach out our hands and walk one another home, instead of being in our own little bubbles, then things might really change. Like to break down the walls and the boxes. We're always so keen to put someone in a box, to put a wall between us and them. And if we just reach out a hand with loving kindness, it changes everything. Sometimes the hand won't be taken, and that's okay. It's not always going to be received, but often it is.
Welcome to the Daily Soul Bar Show. I am your host, Bolaabimbola, frequency alchemist, intuitive life coach, and energy practitioner. Daily Soul Bar Show is where we have guest authors, coaches, and entrepreneurs from the fields of spirituality, psychology, and leadership, sharing their insights for the expansion of collective consciousness. And today I have a very special guest all the way from Australia, but at the moment she's in France. Her name is Tania de Jong. Welcome to the show, Tania.
Thank you so much, Bola. It's an honor.
Thank you for being here. So I'll read a bit about your bio before we start, Tania. Tania is a visionary in healing, spirituality, and mental health innovation. She's a co-founder of Mind Medicine in Australia. Tania has led groundbreaking work in psychedelic-assisted therapy. A soprano, social entrepreneur, and trauma-informed leader, her journey blends personal healing, ancestral wisdom, and cosmic consciousness. That is so powerful. Thank you again for being here, Tania. If you could tell us, Tania, what has been your journey to take you to this place of being a leader in spirituality and using song as well as psychedelic therapies to really serve the community? How have you come to this place? Give us a brief summary of your journey.
Well, it's been an epic journey. So I certainly won't go through it because it would take up the whole interview time. But I guess this all started before I was born with my grandparents, and my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and my mother and father as well. And so I'm very lucky to be here to begin with. So I feel an enormous amount of gratitude for being alive, for the preciousness of life, of all life. And I'm just deeply, deeply blessed to be here now and to be experiencing everything that is going on. And there's so much suffering, but there's also a lot of light in the world, and there's people like you doing incredibly important work. And so, being the daughter and granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, I've always been deeply aware of great suffering and ancestral trauma, which has been really part of my DNA for a very long time, and something that I've been determined to work with and to release so that I can be in this world in my fullest and highest potential and be my full self without being held back by the past and constantly bringing the past into the present. So as a young girl, I always wanted to have singing lessons, and I talk in my TED Talk how singing changes the brain, about the fact that one of my best friends at school told me that I should never bother having singing lessons when I was 14 years old, and I believed her, as we do when we're young and impressionable. And then finally in year 11, I did audition for the chorus of the school musical Oklahoma, and I got the lead role. And that was really a defining moment in my life where I realized that you should never let anyone snatch your dreams away. And it was also about really finding my voice and that's something that I help a lot of people to find their voices as well, their full voice, their full creative expression in life and as a human being, because that's one of the great things that human beings have is their creativity, and we're all creative. A lot of people think that they're not, but we all are, whether we cook or we write or we grow a garden or write poetry or whatever it happens to be. We all have the creative impulse in us. So I've always been very passionate about that. But I did do law at university as a backup because I felt that would be a safe thing to do. And then I set up my singing group, Potpourri, and we've performed all over the world for a very long time and had great success with that. And then about 30 years ago, no, not 30, no, about 25 years ago or so, I set up my first charity, the Song Room, to bring music and arts learning to disadvantaged primary and secondary students around Australia. And that's reached about 1 million, well over 1 million children now. And then I set up another charity, Creativity Australia, and the With One Voice program in 2008 to bring together haves and have-nots, people like us, doctors, lawyers, teachers with migrants, people with depression and disabilities of all faiths, backgrounds and abilities, to come together to use the universal language of singing together to recognise our oneness and our diverse voices so that we can come together and actually help one another. And we have a wonderful program, which I do talk about in my TED Talk, where people help one another through a special, what I call the magical weekly wish list program, so that people can make wishes to one another in the choirs and people start granting one another's wishes. And it's quite beautiful. And the neuroscientific benefits of singing are well proven, and they really help people to improve their language, memory, concentration. When you sing with other people, there's a lot of research that shows that you become smarter, healthier, happier, more creative. It's a super wonder drug. Anyway, and then I set up Mind Medicine Australia with my husband, Peter, in 2019. We launched Mind Medicine Australia to help bring psychedelic-assisted therapies to Australia, to make them legal so that people who are suffering with depression, anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder and other conditions could potentially heal. They've tried everything, but this is a real chance for people to get well, because the research shows that the remission rates for psychedelic-assisted therapies are so much higher than traditional drugs and psychotherapy and so on. But that came about because of a life-changing experience. And I've always been a bit of a hacker of mind, body and spirit. And so I've tried many different modalities, tantra, mantra, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, types of different meditation and all sorts of different things. And then one day I read about psychedelic-assisted therapies through Tim Ferriss's blog, and I read an article in the New Yorker about a trial that had gone on at New York University by Michael Pollan, and it was really showing that people who had end-of-life distress due to a terminal diagnosis of cancer and anxiety and depression associated with that diagnosis, which any of us would have if that happened to us, that 80% of those patients went into remission after just 2 doses of psilocybin and some psychotherapy to support that, because the psychotherapeutic component of psychedelic-assisted therapy is very important so that people can really hold and continue to heal what needs healing and integrate what they experience in an altered state with their real lives. And so I was very, very interested in this, particularly because there was a man in the trial that was profiled in the article who had intergenerational Holocaust trauma, and I knew that I had some of that. And so as soon as I read this article, it was like a light bulb went off, and I said to my husband, we have to go and do this. And so we tried to get into some trials, but we don't have a mental illness. And so we eventually were referred to a guide in the Netherlands, and we were able to undertake this extraordinary experience with psilocybin that was so profound, the sense of oneness, of being part of everything, everything being part of you, the sense of the eternal soul that is in all of us, and the sense of connection with self, others and the planet that was so deep. And So after that, we became deeply interested in these modalities, and we started reading and watching a lot of videos. And then the next year we had another experience about 12 months later. And that was even more profound. And we said, well, if this is affecting us like this, imagine if this could help all the people who are suffering so deeply with mental illness. And of course, mental illness leads to so many other conditions of like homelessness and unemployment and domestic violence and so on. Imagine if we could bring this to Australia and people could start to heal through these medicines. And that's really how we started Mind Medicine Australia. But there's so many other things. I mean, I've also started another charity called the Umbrella Foundation, which produces incredible music and theatre to tell important stories. And so it's a very eclectic mix of different things. But that's sort of where I'm at now. And of course, the really great news is that we managed to make history in Australia through the rescheduling of psilocybin and MDMA in 2023, which was a world first. And now quite a few patients in Australia have been treated with these therapies in legal clinical environments with trained therapists, and we have a wonderful world-class training program, our certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapies. And we really are seeing these extraordinary results, like psychiatrists tell us, wow, that is miraculous, and they've worked with some of these patients for decades and not had that sort of progress. And then all of a sudden, using these modalities, they're seeing this transformation taking place. And we're in a place in the world right now where if we don't rapidly transform ourselves as a civilization, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So it's very important that we use all the tools that we can to help us feel grounded and centered, calm within the chaos, and to really use our skills, our unique talents and skills to serve those who are suffering in this world. That's what I'm really passionate about.
I love that. Thank you so much, Tania. It's beautiful. I love the theme, the thread running through your experiences, and you've shared some really profound achievements, and that thread of service, that thread of healing, and this is something that I totally resonate with. Being open to different modalities. There's so many different modalities, and that we have to be very open-minded. Of audacity to actually try whatever the conditioning may be, because the system has some modalities that it considers to be okay and some that it doesn't. And I love the work that you've done in Australia, and this is something that I think is quite phenomenal, and we do need to be more open-minded about these things. So thank you for sharing your
about everything, really. I mean, like, we need, there's no right medicine that fits every single person, and we need to go back to a lot of our ancient wisdom and start to tune into what those ancient cultures know and how they healed suffering and how they raised consciousness.
Yes. I'd love to hear a bit more about that. I wanted, and in fact, this question may lead us to tapping into some of those ancestral modalities. How in your work have you found spirituality to be something that is critical when it comes to healing, regardless of whatever modality? What is the role of spirituality?
So we are spirit. We have a body, and we need to look after our body. But without our soul and spirit being intact and being integrated into us, our body can get very sick, and so can our minds. And then we lose side of the path forward, and we also start to literally become physically ill or mentally ill, or both. Ram Dass used to say, though we live in this world, we know that we are of the spirit. And if we know that, then it makes everything entirely different, because we can see life on different dimensions. Well, it's not just this material plane. It's not just this body. Of course, our body is our temple, and we have to look after it very, very well so it can house our spirit and our soul. But if we don't stay in touch with the spirit, and that's what I feel we've really lost, we've become so detached not only from the earth, but also from the heavens. And we have this world wide web that I think sits between earth and heaven, and it's blocking us from really reaching into higher states of consciousness a lot of the time, because it's very distracting. It's very short attention span. And it takes people away from their true connection to themselves and to others and to their spiritual selves, and also potentially to their ancestors that are also, sending important messages as well. So I think what is very important is that we reconnect back to spirit and to earth, and that this World Wide Web somehow can, of course, it's always going to be there, but we need to be very conscious of how much space it's taking up. So if you see that constellation behind me, I like to think of that as this very healthy network of connection, not a World Wide Web, but really a brain that is super connected and that is operating at its full capacity, and a body that is connecting throughout its whole cellular structure and embracing what is in this very moment, and trying to be with what is, no matter how uncomfortable it may feel. Living in a world where there's a lot of instant gratification, you just go out and get whatever you want, and if something doesn't feel good to you, just walk away from it. And instead of sort of going in and through and feeling what is really there, and what are some of the lessons and learnings that you need to embrace so that you can start to experience more of who you really are, instead of just this body or just this or just this. It's like we are so much. I'm not saying that I'm fully whole at all, but I'm working on that. And I feel that's what life is for, to really bring all the parts of ourselves into the one, into the whole.
I love that. And this is the work of internal family systems, which is SWOT.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
So it's so key for us to identify, to be aware of, to hold, to love, because I don't think those parts surrender to our true spirit self unless they feel safe. We must come to a place where we are fully understanding the parts of self, and then we can allow those parts to surrender, to actually surrender to that spirit self, which I totally agree with you. This is our true self. But I did want to ask you, Tania, what is the role of sound? That experience of transformation, of allowing that physical ego self, with all its identities, with all its parts, to really begin to surrender and trust. It's a process that has to be done through love. It cannot be done by force.
No.
Physical ego self has a role to play. There's a role it plays in our day-to-day, and I love what you said about it. It never goes away. It's about how it can become driven. And that process of the physical ego self being driven by the true spirit self. Does sound, and how does because I know that's a modality that you've used from a very young age, as you said.
Yeah. No, I have. I mean, so, a lot of people, are afraid of their own voice, or, of being heard and seen properly. And so their voices, and often that's because their voices have been silenced. And our voice is our human instrument, like our body is our human instrument. So when we resonate, right through from the depth of the earth, and have the roots of our feet and legs and everything in the depths of the center of the core of the earth, and then we bring that energy through us and we allow our voice to fully resonate, then more of ourself again comes out. So again, this is about going back to wholeness. It's another part of us in a way, because a lot of people isolate that part of themselves, like their voice is like cut off from their bodies. Like people think their voice is just from here upwards, but it's actually your whole being that is sounding. And if your whole being can sound, then you will sound resonant and authentic. Whereas if you speak sort of just from here, it's somehow cut off from your heart, firstly, and then the rest of your being. So sounding and making sound, not just singing sound, but vocal sounds, any kind of sound, anything, just whee! It's just something really powerful, and it helps us also to be free.
Freedom is so key. There's nothing as sweet as freedom and peace.
Right.
So I know you hold retreats where a number of thousands of people come, and you support them to really experience this sense of peace. Tell us a bit about these retreats and maybe an experience that you had in one of your retreats that really made an impact on you.
Yes, well, one of the things I do is a lot of voice activation. So helping people to experience loving kindness, compassion through coming together with sound, and particularly their own voices. And this can be very uncomfortable for people. As I mentioned before, a lot of people have a fear of using their voice, or certainly using it in public. And my God, singing together or sounding together, it's like, wow, that is out of their comfort zone. But inevitably, even with 1,000 accountants in a room or whatever it might be, I managed to get them all coming into harmony together and singing together, and realizing that every individual voice is making the whole. It's like a beautiful tapestry. And so we get this into this place of this circle, really, these circles, sometimes circles, multiple circles, spinning around each other in a way, and coming together, sharing loving kindness through their voices and healing people in the center. I often hold sound baths where we actually are healing people in the center through the vibration of sound and our hearts that are deeply involved in creating the sound. And it's quite remarkable to see, like, the altered states that people go into and the love that comes through them. Like, some of them say it's like being with the angels, and like being in a cathedral with the greatest sense of love and peace, or whatever it may be. It's the combination of diverse voices coming together to create this harmony from their hearts entirely alters the dynamic of the group and helps people to reconnect to themselves and to a greater one, the one, the one of us all. And it's very profound work. And when you do it with corporate people too, which I often do, that's particularly profound, because it's really something different to go out of their left brain, analytical, logical mind, and to really come into more the right side intuition and feeling, and to start to speak from the heart. And when you speak from the heart, it makes such a difference to how the listener really receives you. And we often don't do that. We speak from our minds, and it's and you can feel that it's sort of cut off. It's not the whole of us. And so I see some amazing transformations. I'm just thinking, and I also work with a lot of therapists too. So we have our certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapies, and it's amazing to see, like, for example, all the psychiatrists and the medical doctors and the psychologists and counselors and others come together. And sometimes the doctors and psychiatrists are a little stiff to begin with, but then all of a sudden it's like they're holding hands with everyone else. They're singing with their full voice, and the tears are running down their faces, and they're feeling a transformation and a shift in their consciousness that is so healing. Mm-hmm. It's very, very beautiful. I've just come out of a retreat this weekend that was incredibly moving, and we all sang together. I sang, people cried. It was very, very powerful indeed. So coming together in groups and doing some type of, I don't know, it is a kind of group therapy, I guess, that we're all healing each other. And Ram Dass would say, and I use him, he's a great teacher of mine. I spent a week living with him in 2018, not long before he passed away. And he always said, we are walking each other home. And I love that quote. And I've just written a song, which I'm releasing in the next couple of weeks. I'll send it to you, and maybe you'd like to attach it to this podcast. It's a beautiful little video with it as well. We are walking each other home. And if we could just reach out our hands and walk one another home, instead of being in our own little bubbles, then things might really change. Like to break down the walls and the boxes. We're always so keen to put someone in a box, to put a wall between us and them. And if we just reach out a hand with loving kindness, it changes everything. Sometimes the hand won't be taken, and that's okay. It's not always going to be received, but often it is. Mm-hmm. And people are so surprised. It's like, wow, that never happened to me before. I worked with a girl this weekend who said she never had a home and this feeling of having these responsible adults around her. And it was just beautiful to see her come into herself and to start to really fully inhabit herself when she was supported by the group.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that, because I think, I totally agree with you. There is a need for us to be open from that heart space. And I love the way you use sound and singing to allow those who come to your retreats experience that deep opening of the heart space. That's part of what that I do as well. I'm a quantum Reiki practitioner. So
Oh, beautiful.
those who are, yes, I love it. I've been doing it since 2018. And really, this is about, my previous, I did 2 years of medicine, and then I did psychology, and then I became a manager, and then suddenly Reiki came into my life, and there was no going back, because it touched that sense of spirit within me. And I could see that this physical body, which is part of us, is not really who I truly am. And
No, we're all energy. Look behind me. That's who we are. We're energy.
yes, changing from that space of
Yes.
and allowing ourselves to really embed that infinite love, unconditional of spirit of our higher self into that survival driven ego self. And that's also what my book Daily Soul Bites is about. And it was published by Barbara Press, a division of Hay House. And really, Daily Soul Bites is talking, thank you, Tania. Daily Soul Bites is talking about the different perspectives that we have within us. We've got the physical ego perspectives, which are usually around fear, usually survival based, and we all have them. I don't think anybody could, it is only when we pass that we no longer have that physical ego perspectives. And then we also have the spirit self perspectives. When we understand these perspectives, we can then choose to align, because a lot of the times we think we only have one perspective when we, going about our day to day, but being aware of those two and choosing to align, because what we focus on is really what expands in our day to day. Your work is allowing those who come to your retreats are focusing on that heart space, that loving space. And I did want to ask something about sound and how how our body and the mind changes when we are using that modality of sound. But I'll let you say what you were about to say.
No, that's okay. I think I was just going to say, you were saying that when we pass, it's the death of the ego, but it's interesting because with psychedelic-assisted therapies, if you are guided in the right setting with the right medicine dose and pure medicine, then I had a complete, and many people had this experience of this complete ego dissolution where you no longer are you, and you're just a soul traveling through space or eternity and recognizing that that is all there is, really.
And it's also about frequencies, and the timelines, because we can have the physical ego parts of one timeline totally dissolved, really, maximized in a way where they're totally surrendered, much more living in flow and living in synchronicity and less resistance. But we can also, in another space and time, find ourselves in another timeline where the things that we thought we had overcome come back, or we find that this version of self is actually experiencing a little more turbulence than than that past self. And we say to ourselves, I thought I'd
got through that.
So, I think for me, it's all about frequency and timeline, which is why, in my work as a quantum Reiki practitioner, I work with frequencies and timelines and how we can begin to match the frequency of our better outcomes. Frequencies that allow us to flow more, allow us to feel more loved, allow us to be lovable as infinite pieces of that universal intelligence. So I do appreciate modalities that encourage or facilitate a maximized dissolution of the ego. So I would want to know a bit more about your psychedelic therapies, but I did want to find out a bit more about how sound what sound does to the body, to the mind, to the brain. How do those who delve into this sound, sound therapy or vocal sessions with you, what happens to that body? What happens to those parts of self that then begin to dissolve?
I mean, it's again, it is about raising frequency, absolutely. And so when you're singing and your breath is vibrating through you and supporting your voice, then you are vibrating at a different frequency, and it does feel entirely different. And if you can allow your voice to be supported by your breath, and if you can breathe well and properly, and I teach a lot of breathing to a lot of people, it seems so basic that we should be able to breathe, but we're never really taught how to breathe. It's not something that, unfortunately, I mean, I think every child at school should be taught to breathe properly, but we're often not. And a lot of people don't breathe properly. They just breathe in, the upper part of their chest, and they're not able to fully connect into their lower ribs and their stomach and other parts of their body. I mean, you can really even breathe right up from your feet, and it's wonderful when you start to feel that you are supported by this wonderful column of air, and that you can then sound out of that fullness of you and share that with others, or just do it for yourself. But it is wonderful to sing with others. There's a lot of research that shows that when you sing with others, it's more powerful. It's a more powerful experience, and you start to really tune in to yourself and others in an entirely different way. So we run all these with one voice choirs, and we see absolute transformation happening on a weekly basis with those programs all the time. Mm-hmm. And people go off they manage to go off their antidepressants in many cases. They find lifelong friends. Some of them find accommodation jobs. It's amazing what happens just through the act of sounding and singing together. Mm-hmm. It really is miraculous. I call it a super duper wonder drug.
Yes, it's the change in I love what you said about the change in frequencies, because it almost seems like magic. And we all have those times when, we're going through some kind of a dark night of the soul, and we know we're in a particular frequency, and
that's right.
We can use whatever modality. There's so many modalities. Reading and books are also one of mine, and I love Ram Dass. I remember at the age of 18 seeing the book by Ramana Maharishi on the shelves at home, titled Who Am I? And that was the first introduction to different parts of self. And that's where my journey began, just understanding the different parts of self.
Yeah.
And one self has a particular frequency, and another self has a particular frequency, that higher self, and how we can come to embody more of the frequency of the higher self in our day-to-day, regardless of what is thrown at us.
No. Well, that's the key.
Because we all have ups and downs. Life will always have ups and downs. But I wanted to ask you, Tania, what is, something that we can do around the ancestral healing, and how we can come to allow those ancient frequencies to become more helpful, more a part of our day-to-day in the present. What's your experience of transformation using ancestral healing, ancestral modalities, in that, deeper connection with the soul?
Well, I think getting very familiar with your family story and however far back you can trace that is very important, and really knowing where you've come from and who you've come from is very important. And you have to face into that, no matter how difficult that may be. There's usually, in most families, there's some type of trauma. Either, we have trauma in our own lives or in our relatives, or both. And but then it's also very important to let go of the past and to not bring that along with you, so that you're constantly bringing the past into the present, and because that will just hold you back, and you'll just start to embody the suffering of your ancestors. And so I've had to do a lot of work on releasing and letting go of my ancestors. That doesn't mean that I don't love them and treasure them, because if it weren't for them, I wouldn't be here. But I can't carry them in my body either. And I can't carry their suffering in my body. And so I honor them with all of my heart, but I also need to let them go so that they can also be free to be in the spiritual soul world and, bring their gifts as souls back into here, or maybe they've been reincarnated, who even knows. But, when you've seen that level of suffering that some of my relatives did, it can be very, very traumatic, and you can keep just being triggered and re-traumatized. And for a very long time, I was re-triggered and re-traumatized by anything to do with the Holocaust. I couldn't even be in the room if something came up about it, if there was any film about it or anything about it at all. I had to literally leave the room. And so it's taken me an enormously long time to really come to terms with what happened to my family members and, and to just accept that. Like, I have to accept what has happened, but I can't change anything about it. And all I can do is be as much in my light as possible, and to keep bringing my shadows into the light and transmute those shadows of the past and bring more light into this world now.
I love that. Thank you. That is so powerful, because I do agree with you, Tania. There is a role that our past, our ancestors have to play, because we are here based on that timeline that we have chosen. And I have a belief that we choose our timelines, we choose our ancestors, we choose their trauma, and we choose to transform it as empowered beings of light based on our soul purpose. And this brings me to the modalities that we choose to use, because there's some people who would prefer to use modalities that their ancestors used, and this is okay. There's no right or wrong, but it's about being more open, being aware that there are 8 billion modalities. Really, there are different modalities, and choosing to use a modality that is outside of what your community would normally use has to be okay, has to be something that we're more open to actually embracing. So I'd love to know more about the psychedelic therapies, because it is something that I know in Australia is quite now almost mundane, but in many parts of the world it is not. But I also understand the value of it. I understand the fact that it creates a deep transformation to a spirit self level. So I'd love to know more about the psychedelic therapies that and how it works combined with obviously the intuitive aspect of things. But it's not a joke. This is not about just, we can choose to have fun with it. That's fine. But, what we're talking about here is really how those who use it, or who are supported to use it, are supported to transform that physical ego part, or the particular part that is experiencing some kind of challenge in that moment. How in your work, how do you support your clients and your customers, those who come to you, to transform that physical ego grip to a place of freedom, a place of liberation, using psychedelic therapy?
So firstly, there's psychedelic-assisted therapies, because, of course, it is the combination, as you rightly point out, of the actual psychedelic medicine with therapy. And this is very important because, as I mentioned earlier, when you go into these altered states of consciousness, it's deeply important to be able to integrate those experiences. Many people describe these experiences as one of the top 5 most meaningful experiences in their lives, on a par with the birth of their first child or their wedding day. And certainly for us, it was that. It was like, wow, I just could not believe the power of the mystical experience and the dissolution of ego and the freedom that gave my soul, and the peace that came in through that. But it's deeply important in that to be held by people who are very well trained to guide you, which either will be a trained therapist or a trained shamanic healer. And so it's very important, if you're contemplating working with these modalities, that you find someone that you've done your due diligence on, and done a lot of due diligence on, that you can trust deeply, because this work it's very deep work. Like, it's not anything like any other kind of modality that is out there. I mean, the closest thing to it, I guess, is breath work. So like holotropic and other types of breath work that take you into altered states. But this is generally much more profound. And in that, you need to be very held so that you can feel very safe in the experience to allow all your barriers to come down, and that you can travel into different dimensions of consciousness and know that, they are teaching you different things about your life journey and your soul's journey and so on. So the main medicines that we are working with in Mind Medicine Australia are psilocybin, which is coming from magic mushrooms, and MDMA, which is actually an empathogen that was synthesized about 100 years ago and has been around for a long time. But of course, all these medicines were made illegal in 1970 in the war on drugs. And so all research stopped pretty much at that point. And there's been this lost 50 years where, unfortunately, there was not been any research. But now there's this enormous renaissance in this field. And more countries are starting to come on board and starting to deliver these therapies in legal environments to people who are suffering and for whom no other treatment has worked. All medicines are about the set and setting and the intention that is behind them. I mean, if you go and take a pack of Panadol, it's going to make you sick or die. If you take a lot of sleeping pills, it's very unhealthy. If you take these medicines in the wrong way without the right setting guide, etc., then that's not a great idea. And I don't recommend you go and pick your own mushrooms unless you really know what you're looking for. If you're a therapist out there and you want to train, many therapists come from all over the world, and we train therapists mostly online and then with an intensive course and so on. But, our great goal is to help raise consciousness so that people can deal with what is happening and the enormous wicked problems that we're facing as civilization. And we need as much healing going on as possible.
Very true, very true. Thank you for that. And you have shared where people can find you, Tania. Thank you so much. And do you have any final words for us today before we go?
I just want to say, it really is a sacred gift to be alive. And no matter what we've gone through and the pain and suffering that we may be experiencing, there is hope. And if every one of us contains an enormous amount of light deep within us, and if we can come closer to that light, even in the darkness, it's there as a guide for us so that we can step forwards and walk each other home. And I really just want to encourage everyone to walk each other home. And I will send you that video. And I'd love you to share it with everyone. And I just really encourage people to become their own chief medical officer. Don't rely on all of the other stuff that's around you. You've really got to tune into yourself at the end of the day and work out what's right for you. And there can be a lot of trial and error in that. But the more you tune into yourself, the more you'll know what is right for you, what is the right medicine, the right path, the right profession, the right partner. All of these things are part of being in flow. And as you say, being in the right frequency to really start to hear the messages that you're being given.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me again today, Tania.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Beautiful. And I'd love to thank our audience for joining us today and to invite you to subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. We have new episodes with amazing guests like Tania every Wednesday. We broadcast every Wednesday in so many different platforms. So subscribe and connect with me if you do want to experience some quantum Reiki soul psych awakening sessions. We do it online or it could be in person. And also connect with Tania Tania. This is a lot of modalities that she's offering that really allow us to stay in the present, in that place of freedom and service and fulfillment. So I do encourage you to connect with her. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Daily Soul Bytes Show. Bye-bye.